Hey, real quick before we get into this video, this upcoming Saturday, April 5th, I'm doing my first OP10 format tournament for the One Piece card game. It will have the restriction list live, it will be online, and it will have Swiss into Top Cut as well. So if you haven't already, make sure to check it out, link in the description, and enjoy the video. Hey everyone, Eggman here with another video, and we've got the week 3 power rankings for the OP10 meta of the One Piece card game, and this is brought to you guys by TCG Matchmaking. They do a lot of great data, and I really do appreciate all that they do. You can make sure to check out their Patreon, linked in the description, and also Sakura Kingdom, who does a lot of their data analysis behind the scenes too. You can make sure to check out his YouTube too. He does a lot of good content as well into this. But honestly, I'm really excited to kind of go over this week. This is pretty much like the last week before we get into real events with this new kind of post restriction list meta that we have for OP10. I think a lot of people have been testing it for the last couple of weeks, and the last couple power rankings have been based off this new restriction list as well. So we do have some data for it, but obviously kind of like a tournament setting versus like a ranked ladder setting is a little bit different, and excited to see how people do as well. But real quick, if you guys are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe. We make a lot of content for the One Piece card game, and we do keep our website Eggman events here up to date as much as we can, so make sure to check it out. If you guys want any of this data, any of the deck list, or any other things One Piece related, you can make sure to check it out. And I do a lot of work to make sure that it keeps, you know, as much data as we can on there as well. But we're gonna go over the power rankings real quick, the matchup chart, and then go over the highest win rate deck list for each one of these leaders at high ranked, and we're gonna start off with this right here. So here are the power rankings right now, and nothing too wild, I think. And generally speaking, the top 6 leaders that they have right now of Shanks, Zoro, Purple Luffy, Dofi, Teach, and Bonnie, I think these are kind of where I would say tier 1 kind of is. I think these are going to be the 6 leaders that kind of represent a majority of the meta, and there's going to be a bit of a drop off after that. But honestly, these are all pretty diverse. Among these 6 different leaders, we have 5 different colors represented, which I think is really cool. I think that yellow is really the only color in this game that's a little bit lower represented, and even when we were seeing a lot of representation OP09, half it was, you know, yellow and black Luffy, which wasn't really a yellow deck, and then also Anel, which is kind of absent in this format with the restriction of Kingdom Come. So I do think that's important. And then after that, I think there's kind of like a scramble of what are the best decks into the top 10 afterwards. This week it ends up being Lim, Rob Lucci, Usopp, and Eustace Captain Kidd. So Lim and I think Kidd have been pretty popular the last couple weeks, but Lucci and Usopp are, you know, 2 that kind of snuck in to this one as it is, and also it chopped off a little bit. I promise Kidd's right there. There he is right there at the bottom. But I do think that this is a, you know, it's kind of clear. Like, again, these top 6 leaders, I think, are pretty clear, very viable and going to be around for this meta. And then after that, there's going to be a lot of kind of random and obscure decks that can still get that topping. So I will also say I did make a tier list earlier this week, and mostly based off my own experience on the rank ladder, doing some testing, and also kind of these last couple weeks of power rankings. I put a top 5. I should have just said top 6 and put Purple Luffy up there. I think they're all pretty interchangeable there, and if anything, like maybe Purple Luffy's better than Bonnie, but I think again all 6 of these leaders are going to be most of the representation for tournaments for the short while, at least the beginning of the OP10 meta here in North America. And then I think the only big miss that I got from this tier list that I think a lot of people correctly identified in the comments, and I've been seeing again here, is Lim. I probably put it a little bit too low in potential. It probably needs to go up to competitor, even like highly competitive at the tail end. I don't think the deck is bad. I just had a lot of bad experiences with my own testing with it, and I never found a build that I felt was really strong. And the fact that you kind of have to go first a little bit more often, and if you don't find your 1-drop Lim, I find that the deck is a little bit lackluster because of it. But I think the deck is still good, and we're going to go over a deck list for a little bit for it. But I do recognize that was a shortcoming from my own tier list going on into this format, and I do want to just kind of mention it here in this video too. So other than that, I think that it's pretty clear some of the decks that are good, but again, there is kind of a scramble for what I'll call kind of like the tier 1.5 decks that can kind of still fight a good amount of decks in these, you know, top 6. kind of spots, but kind of rounding out the format as it is. So we also do have a snapshot on some of these matchup charts, and you can see that it's pretty clear to me that there's not one deck that's just better than everything else, right? We've seen it previously with like Dofi and OP10 format, where that deck really didn't have a lot of bad matchups, especially compared to a lot of the other decks people are playing. We see that Shanks is still kind of like the 50-50 matchup. Nothing like no matchup feels like unbeatable for the deck outside of like sometimes red purple Luffy, but other than that, like everything seems really solid for the deck. We have Teach, at above average, I think, in this format outright. Also, I do want to mention for people who are confused. So for this matchup chart too, the left side is the deck that you're playing, and then the top side is what you're playing against. So Shanks versus Zoro is 47% win rate against Zoro. So Shanks has the 47%, in case you guys are curious about that. So, but generally speaking, Teach, has a bit of a bad matchup into Zoro, and still a really bad matchup in the Dofi, which I think this deck is still going to be really present. But other than that, most decks are moderately obtainable. We do have like Luffy and Lim as bad matchups too. So I think Teach is still going to be very good in this format, but I don't think it's going to be tier 0, and I don't really think anything's going to be really tier 0 into this format. We do have Zoro, which is pretty good aggressively into a lot of decks, but then again, it does kind of lose to its old rivals of Dofi and Rob Lucci, and then Usopp might be another bad matchup that is present in this format for it. We have Smoker, which didn't make the top 10 this week, since it did have a bit of an abysmal win rate at like 46%, even though it was one of the most played leaders for this past week. It does just have a lot of polarizing matchups in my mind, and even our good matchups are like 50-50. But I totally understand like why Smoker's in kind of a weird spot, because it's just like not consistent. Like it does have like a lot of like ceiling for power, but it's just I feel like you whiff a lot. I feel like you don't find your pieces. You don't get a lot of cycle, and it can just kind of hurt you in the end. Purple Luffy is still very strong, I think, in this format. Our biggest issue is still Bonnie, which is a little bit more present, and I think a little bit more powerful in this format outright. The removal of Ice Age makes Rob Lucci a little bit easier for us, and Dofi is a little bit easier for us too, since they don't have Jinbei to kind of aggress us a little bit earlier. So I think Purple Luffy's in a really good spot. We've got Bonnie as well, kind of having some polarizing matchups. Like still Teach is kind of rough for us, but other than that, most decks in this top 10 right now are very good in one way. Lucci is still kind of a rough matchup, but again, it's not as present as it used to be. Dofi is still fantastic, right? Our only kind of real bad matchup is the Bonnie, and then also Usopp, but I don't think Usopp is that present, and Bonnie is just kind of like not in our favor, and Shanks as well, but we're not too worried about that. Usopp's kind of in a weird spot where Shanks and Purple Luffy are really bad matchups, but we still have some other good matchups that exist. I think Usopp's going to be slightly better as time goes on in this format, but it is a bit of a specific deck right now, and then we can kind of check out the rest from there. But in general, we see there's a lot of, you have to really recognize what matchups are our bad ones, which ones are your good ones. And with the kind of diversity in this meta so high right now, it's really difficult to build a deck that counters everything, right? Which is really cool for diversity. But I also do think that there are going to be some players who grind these tournaments, who want to try to do as best as they can, and it's going to be really difficult to kind of cement yourself on one deck when you have to accept that there are some really bad matchups that you might run into. So we'll see kind of how that develops for the next couple of weeks, but here again is the matchup chart, and let's quickly go over the top placing leaders top win rate deck list for each one of these top 10 leaders in our power rankings. So we're going to kind of jump through some of these a little bit quicker than others. We're going to start off with Shanks, and my favorite thing about Shanks right now is that there's a lot of build diversity when it comes to it. Red just got a lot of great cards from OP10 as well as Star Deck 21. I think this Luffy is such a strong card for applying some pressure. For 5 Dawn investment, you're a 7k rush attack with this, with its leader effect, and then with its when attacking effect. And then like if your opponent doesn't answer this card, you get that again every turn. Like it's so strong. There's a lot of ways to take advantage of it, and this card is just really strong. So I think Shanks can take advantage of it. Chopper is also a really good 2k that can turn into a 6k blocker on defense, which is really good. I do also like the Zoro that we got from Star Deck 21. it just kind of plays around KO effects. It means that, you can play this for 4, and then if they get rid of it, you can go into Marcos, Silvers, Luffy. Like, there's just so much value you get to do, and like the protection from it is really strong. And then, like, as always, we have like this big top end with the deck. We've got Beckman, we've got Silvers, we've got Dragon, we've got Shanks, and a single copy of Goldie Roger. I think that this deck is still very kind of at the whim of, do you find your top end at the late game at the right time? If not, you're going to be in a big trouble spot. And there's also kind of the inverse where you can brick a lot. But I think there's going to be a lot of people on Shanks. There's just going to be people that just have a good day with it, above average luck on what they are seeing in their curve, and they're going to get a lot of success because of it. So we'll see how Shanks ends up doing. But I think this is probably one of, if not the strongest leaders in this format, just due to how good red is right now. So there it is. Next up, you got Zoro, and Zoro's pretty, standard for where it's been for, since the release of this leader in set 1, right? Like, we're just being aggressive, right? We are easily the most generic aggressive deck that we can be in this game right now. The fact that there's a lot of other decks where, like, this leader effect is just overtuned, right? I think most people can kind of agree. Like, there's some leaders that can kind of like approach, if they build into like how their leader works, the amount of aggression for Zoro, but the cost is so low and the rewards are so high that you just get so much pressure from being able to get that plus 1k, right? Like, if you give +3, if you have 3 things on the board, right, putting 1 Dawn underneath your leader gives plus 4k, right, across your leader and then your 3 characters that you have on board, which is pretty insane. So Luffy works really good with the leader too, because you can attack and then you can give the Dawn to your leader, so you don't even have to like use a Dawn for it. Chopper is definitely kind of the preferred package for most people, but there are builds I've been seeing without the animal package that are more kind of rush centric, which I think can be viable too. And then we also, again, are just taking advantage of a lot of the cards that we got from this set, as well as the star deck. Like, the Sanji is just kind of a better Jambé more times than not. It's a little bit more expensive at times, so it being a 2k instead of being a dead card in hand is good. The fact that you can't use it on your leader is probably for the best, because this card only lets you choose a character with 6k power or more that has Straw Hat Crew in its name, but it's very easy just to be like, okay, cool. I'll play Luffy and then play Sanji, or I'll play 3-drop Zoro and then give it there and give it rush. So not too big of a detriment. Even if like we have like a Nami that we end up playing early end of the game that just stays on board, we can just give it enough power and then attack with it, because it doesn't care if it's base power 6k or less. Sorry, 6k or more. You can just put 4 Dawn onto Nami and then you can start attacking with it. So I don't think there's going to be an issue for Sanji to find a target more times than not. But I think Zoro is very strong. I think it's going to be one of the premier aggressive decks in this format. I do think it can run out of steam against stuff like Dofi and Rob Lucci, which it has been kind of gate kept from the meta before in OP10. But it's there. I think those decks are going to be a little bit less present and a little bit less strong, and I think that means that there's a bit of an edge for Zoro to make an appearance. So there it is there. Next up, we've got Purple Luffy, and I've been seeing some kind of interesting builds for this leader in general. This is, again, I'd say a little bit more standard. The biggest card that I see that I don't see a lot of copies of is this God Thread. So KO up to one of your opponent's characters, it costs a 5 or less, then you can add up to 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it to active. So it is great for some removal, and it's also great for being able to get some disruption on your like being able to get the ramp, right? Like, we've been seeing people play like the It's Delicious, or sorry, It's to Die For, the 3-cost ramp, the All-Star Disaster for 4. This card is, I think, still fine for what we want to do with it, and like the trigger off of life. Sometimes just being able to get that ramp is good in its own way, but like, we generally don't have like a lot of removal in this deck until kind of like the later game, if at all. So if we are playing against a deck where that removal is really strong, I think that does help us a lot. I do also don't see this Law as often, but it is a good blocker that sometimes can use its effect to get some removal of cards from your opponent's hand, which is really good. And then I've been seeing a lot of people play Hito Kiri, which the weird thing about this card is that sometimes you don't really have a Dawn minus effect to go with it. Sometimes, like, if you play it for 4 and then like on 7 you play Luffy Taro, you can get there. But you do kind of have to play it early and hope your opponent doesn't remove it, and then you're able to use the effect from it. But it's a little bit tough to do that, I think, consistently, because it's like the only way you can do it in like the same turn you play it now is with Trafalgar Law, which is strong still. You need to play like 2 4K or 4 drops that also gets rid of something, but it's a I don't know how I feel about this card. I think it's a good 2K, but it's kind of difficult for you to chain their effects without playing it early. For like the Luffy Taro, the Charlotte Lin Lin, or like the Monkey D Luffy to get that additional removal. So lastly, Gum Gum Giant is still a broken card. I still think it's a minor mistake that it was able to dodge a restriction for us in OP10. And I think most people in OP11 in Asia are saying, like, man, this card is part of the reason that these purple Luffys are able to run around as much. And I'll be curious to see if anything happens with this card. But you could play it at 4 copies, so why would you not? It's super good. And purple Luffy can definitely take advantage of it. So here's the deck right now. Again, I think it's a little bit linear, but it is very strong. And it did lose a couple of its bad matchups, which it really appreciates. So there it is there. Next up, we have Dofi, and we have to just scramble and say what is the best replacement for Jinbei in this current format. I think most people are deciding that the best way to get the value back is we're playing more copies of Gecko Moria. This was usually like a 2 of, but I think most people are bumped it back up to a 4 of just to be able to get some additional card draw, which is really strong. And then mostly just adding Red Rock. I think this is also more of a just meta awareness, like being able to get rid of 8-drop Kid is really strong, and then being able to get rid of like 10-drop Teach or something like that. Like there's a lot of cards that this just hits really nicely that helps in this format. Raging Tiger we still play a couple copies of, and still like Jozu can be a big menace I think in this format. It just gets you so much tempo immediately. We're still playing a bunch of 1-drops in our early games that most decks just are going to let exist on the board for most of the game, and because of that you can really bounce them back very easily to get that extra advantage. So I don't think Dofi is gone in this format. I still think it's honestly one of the stronger decks in this format right now, and you definitely have to be aware that it's still around and you have to have a game plan around it. But here's the deck for Dofi. Again, it's not changing much. The biggest change is you have to remove the Jinbei, but still really present, and watch out for it. Next up, we got Teach, and I feel like I say this, and it's some people catch it as like a negative thing, but there's not a lot of choices for Teach. You are already kind of like a deck where there is only so many spots available, and then you're like, cool, well, you just lost 4 more because we had to add this Kuzan. A lot of people are generally choosing to choose 2 to 3 copies of the Shiryu, which this card's a bit of a menace. I've been playing a lot of ladder, and people who can establish this at the right time, there's just a lot of value you can get from it. Being able to remove something on main on the turn you played is really good, but also being 7k on opponent's turn makes a big difference, right? It kind of makes it weird for you to try to remove this card in the first place. You just kind of have to let it hang around, and then it just means like you get another 5k attack every turn, which can kind of start adding up. So I think this card is definitely worth kind of investing 2 or 3 copies of. This build is running 3 of it right now, with 3 of each of the Shiryu, with the other one being the 2k. But I've been moderately impressed with how good this card can be in current builds too. But other than that, like we are just so strapped for spots for tech in this deck right now. We have to just run so many of our Blackbeard Pirates, right? A lot of people are playing 43 copies of My Era Begins. Finger Pistol I feel like has to be 4 copies of, because it is just generally the best removal card that we can play. The fact that it gets rid of a 5 or less is very, very obnoxious. Black Hole at 2 or 3 copies, and then also Full Lead being able to just be very consistent in the late game. So I am still surprised this card wasn't considered on getting hit, but I also don't think Teach is like outward. I was moderately afraid that Teach was going to be like approaching tier 0, but I don't think that's going to be the case in this format still. It's got a good amount of counters that still exist in this meta right now. Dofi's not gone, so that means you have to be afraid of it, and it's just kind of like equaling out as just kind of a solid deck, but again, not the clear best deck in this format right now. So I also think that people are kind of aware for how to play around it. There's some kind of tough decisions you have to play into and against Teach as well, and I don't have much more to say. This is Teach. You guys kind of know what you think about it and what it looks like, but this is the build for it here. Next up, we've got Bonnie, and again, Bonnie's I think's gotten a good amount of playability in this format. I think the 5-drop Smoker has been a very good add for this deck, being able to be like a little bit banish aggressive, which is good, but also getting that extra Dawn every turn as long as it stays on board means it's very easy for you to get to 10, use a 10-drop, and then have 1 Dawn open for leader effect. I think Tashigi also is very good. You guys already have your thoughts on 8-drop Kid, Tashigi, and Rosinante. Still just a very good combo. And I think we're just in a format where Hody Jones just presents a lot of game win states if your opponent isn't isn't playing around it or isn't aware that this can just drop and lose them the game immediately. So this card just seems very, very good right now. There's also just times where you play it a little bit early, which means then you can, play defend 8-drop kit a little bit easier because you have that one more card in hand. And yeah, I think Bonnie's in a obnoxiously strong spot in this meta right now. It's not unbeatable. You do have some bad matchups, but it's kind of rounded out as just a very solid pick, and I think it's going to be doing well in this format as well. So there we go. Next up, we got Lim, and as mentioned earlier, I think I kind of underestimate this deck a little bit. It's a deck that I've been doing a lot of testing with a lot of different builds, and I just don't really know the best way to build it, to be honest. This is the build that we have for this week, and some kind of things to mention in general. One, this 1-drop Lim is amazing. It's just so unfortunate that it's not searchable, and the fact that if we don't see it on turn 1, I feel like our win rate like drops like a good 5 to 10% because of how good this card is for like keeping our board healthy and just having another target for potentially resting things or like using like our abilities a little bit more easy. So I think that's something that's important. I do think like the new support that we got from the set is really good. Newgate being able to rest something that also KO with 3 or less is great, and now being able to draw 3 trash 2 is fantastic. Mihawk being able to restand something, like this card's really flexible. Like if you don't have a better target, you can just play and reset itself so your opponent can't attack into it. There also are some times where you just stack a lot of Dawn onto like an Edward Newgate or something else. You attack with it, and then you can restand and attack with it again with Mihawk, which is really good. And then we can also play a moderately good game of defend 8-drop kid. We're not the best at it, but we can still do it. And then Zoro, honestly, I'll still say it. I think the best way to play this deck is just to turbo out Zoro and pray. Not a lot of decks have like fantastic ways to interact with Zoro right now. This can just generate a lot of value, and I just feel like it's just a lot easier to play this and try to defend it than anything else, especially since we're kind of ramping and playing it at the same time compared to like Bonnie, where you just have to still naturally get to 9 and then you just drop it, cold turkey. So we'll see how it is. I know also a lot of people play like 10-drop Dofi and Adeo, and I don't think those are bad picks, but I've just had a hard time personally with this deck, and maybe my own kind of failures with it have kind of biased me, conditionally to say that Lim is probably a little bit lackluster. But I think it's still a solid pick in this meta. I apologize if I underrated it, and I look forward to seeing how it does in the next couple weeks. But it's definitely not the worst deck in this format, and I think there's a lot of great ways to play it. And again, I'm looking forward to seeing how people do with it. Next up, we've got Rob Lucci, which this was kind of a mild surprise to me. Removal of the Ice Age and the Gecko Moria were definitely two of the better cards that existed for Rob Lucci in general. But I do really appreciate the new kind of play style and gameplay that we get from Rob Lucci after these restrictions. So it's just kind of like my more favored way to play these decks, where it's kind of more like Smoker in the same way, where you're just kind of like this mid-range, you establish a body and you just try to remove something. You just kind of play very tempo based, and you just try to pressure your opponent. Like, we're still a 5-life leader, so we can be more defensive. The other thing that I like in this deck too is that we don't have to run as many non-counter cards, right? Like, we used to play like 4 Ice Age, 4 Moria. We still played like Jack and like the 4 Rob Lucci, right? So the fact that we're able to be our hand is just on average has more counter, I feel like, based on my own testing. So generically, before, when your opponent had like 4 cards in hand, you could still kind of go for game. Right now, I feel like you can very easily kind of stack 2Ks in your hand and still kind of survive in spots that maybe you shouldn't have or wouldn't have in like builds with Moria and Ice Age. I think that's something that's really cool because of this. I really like to see the adaptations that we get from Rob Lucci. I think that the ways that you play this right now can also kind of transfer to the OP10 Black Smoker leader with Tashigi and being kind of more or less like a passive aggressive tempo deck, and it's really cool to see how it's kind of still been present in this meta, and I hope it does continue to kind of be around, even though like the gameplay style from this deck is completely different from where we were, I think, in OP09 and earlier. So one other thing I'll mention is that we do see the 10-drop Kuzan in this deck at 3 copies. I think this is like a little bit aggressive, but also I don't think every deck has like a great way to remove this. It just means that you remove something on play, and if we get, if we're in a healthy enough spot to be able to play this card and get removal, it's fantastic. If we also already have like the Jack in play, and then we play the 10-drop Kuzan, that's just such good value for this deck, being able to remove essentially an 8 or less, and then if we also attacked with our leader first, that's a 9 or less. We could also get rid of an 8 and a 6 using Kuzan 10-drop ability and then the Jack effect. So there's just potential for a lot of removal, and then removal every turn moving forward because of this static -5. So I think it's worth playing into. It seems like it's a little bit greedy because we are running a lot of non-counter cards, I think, compared to other builds I've tried with this, but I think Lucci's in a good spot, and 10-drop Kuzan is very tempting, so it's going to be interesting to see if this kind of build for Lucci catches on. So this is the build there, and again, looking forward to seeing how Lucci does in the next couple weeks. Next up, we got Usopp, which I think this is like one of the most contended leaders for this format right now. You can ask 10 different people and get kind of 10 different opinions on if this leader is good or not right now. I think the easy answer is that it's fine. I think it is a little bit polarizing for its matchups. It's a little bit inconsistent, I think, because of like we do get a lot of card draw, but we have to run a lot of cards without counter, so it's hard to be able to consistently find the cards we need or get counter out for the situations that we need it. I also think this build is a little bit more aggressive. We're not playing any copies of Red Rock, but we're playing 3 whole copies of Gum Gum King Kong Gun, which this I wasn't kind of on board with this card all the time, but generally speaking, the more and more I play, it's very easy for you just to have a bunch of 1-drop Leos or Rebecca's just kind of stay on your board for the entire game, right? Especially since there's situations where your opponents could spend time and energy to remove like a Leo, but then you just get a card draw. And generally speaking, your board is almost never empty as Usopp. You almost always have a card on board. So because of that, like being able to convert Leo into an 8k attacker for 3 Dawn is absurd, right? Like even like the double attack doesn't even matter, and getting 15 cards or more in your trash. It's more so just turning your Leo into a card that can do 1 damage, so your leader can do the other damage too. So I do think that's something that's really important for this deck, that we're able to just kind of up convert into this extra damage very easily, and just make it so your opponent has to be really aware for that. Also, obviously, like Luffy's like the wombo combo for it. Most decks won't let you do that. Most people are really aware that Luffy with King Kong Gun just wins a lot of matchups. Being able to be like a 15k double that gets to attack twice is so strong. But I do think that this deck does have a lot of potential. I wish I was like a little bit better with it, or I maybe not even better with it. I wish it was a little bit closer to my playstyle. It's very close to it. But there's also like some consistency issues with it because you do need to find a lot of pieces, but like Leo is like a really good searcher too. So there's a reason why this is a very controversial leader, in the fact that it has a lot of good things going for it, a lot of bad things going against it. And again, I'm really curious to see how it does on a larger scale in the next couple weeks too. But this is Usopp. And then lastly, we've got Eustace Captain Kidd. And most people I talk to, I think, just decide that this leader is good. By default, it's probably one of like the best, if not the best, yellow leaders in the game right now. But that's not really saying that much. I think yellow is in kind of like the worst spot it's been kind of in a while. There's not a lot of viable leaders that are running yellow right now. And like Kidd is still good, and it's kind of like in this kind of in between. I think probably in previous weeks I've made a bit of a mistake by saying that this can be like aggressive burn base, and it's probably more of like a passive aggressive burn base, right? So we do have Basil Hawkins to be able to trash up to 1 card for your opponent's life. We also have 8-drop Kidd, which does the same. In this build specifically, we also are playing Nico Robin, so this one I think is a little bit more burn heavy, right? And then also we are also playing Enel, so it's just like aggressive, like 7k rush card coming out. So I do think we are a little bit more rush base aggressive in this build specifically for Kidd, but there's just like a lot of different ways to build this, I think, in the first place. So we are also playing our vanilla supernovas, which are just great for being able to have like a blocker to get out of an attack, but also being able to save these bodies, so it's your opponent has a hard time removing them and can't just attack into them. And even if they can, 7Ks and 8Ks are just really good numbers that most decks can't really interact with that well. And in general, I don't know. I think Kid's definitely going to top in this meta. I don't think it's going to be the most consistent deck that we see right now, but it is kind of unique, and it's how his playstyle works. I really think it's an interesting leader, and we'll kind of see how it goes from there. But this is the build for this one, and that's going to be it for this video. I know I've just been kind of rambling through a lot of these, but there's just so much to say. I think there's just a lot of leaders that are really viable right now, with builds within most leaders kind of differ a little bit based on personal preference, which I think is really cool. And I've said this 100 times, but I'll say it one more time. I'm really interested to seeing how our first regional results kind of end up as we start getting them in the next couple weeks. So when we get them, they're going to be, obviously on this website and on my channel. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to be making a lot of One Piece content in the next couple weeks, and I'm really excited for it. So that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.